God promised to bless Abraham, and through him to bless all the nations of the earth. God made the same kind of promise to Abraham's son Isaac and to Isaac's son Jacob. Now, after many years, Jacob had 12 sons, but there was one son named Joseph, whom he loved very much. And Joseph's brothers were very jealous of him.
Must we hear it?
Stop! You mustn't do this!
So they seized Joseph and threw him in a pit. Then they sold Joseph to some traders who were going to a land called Egypt. The brothers dipped Joseph's clothing in blood and told their father that Joseph had been eaten by a wild beast.
Joseph entered the land of Egypt as a slave. But in Egypt, God placed Joseph in the service of powerful people. And in time, Joseph was summoned to appear before the ruler of all Egypt, who was called the Pharaoh. Joseph was asked to interpret a dream. God gave Joseph the correct interpretation concerning a great famine that would come upon the earth. The Pharaoh was pleased with Joseph, and so it was that he placed Joseph in authority over the land of Egypt.
To this man, bow to him!
Now, when the famine came over the earth, Joseph's family suffered greatly in the land of Canaan. But in Egypt, Joseph had filled the storehouses. And even though Joseph had been betrayed by his brothers, he still had a deep love for his family. Because of the position God had given Joseph, his entire family was permitted to come and live in Egypt, escaping starvation.
My son, my beloved son.
And so it was that a people through whom God promised to bless the nations came to dwell in a land that was not their own.
350 years later, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were still in Egypt. They numbered about 2 million and had become known as the Hebrew people. By now, there was a new Pharaoh who feared that the Hebrew people had become too great. So he enslaved them. But they continued to increase. So he ordered the death of every son born into a Hebrew family.
So be it.
Most likely, Satan had a part in this plan, but God had a higher plan. And a Hebrew mother who trusted God laid her baby boy in a wicker basket and placed the basket in a river where the Pharaoh's daughter bathed. When the Pharaoh's daughter saw the Hebrew child, she took him in. The Pharaoh's daughter adopted the boy as her own. She named him Moses. And this Hebrew child grew up as a prince of Egypt.
Like your own mother.
On your feet.
Now when Moses became a man, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. So he killed the Egyptian. Fearing punishment from the Pharaoh, Moses fled to the desert, and he lived there as a shepherd for 40 years. Then one day, God appeared to Moses in a fire in the midst of a bush, yet the bush was not consumed. And God spoke to Moses from the bush.
Moses,
here.
God told Moses to return to his people and lead them out of Egypt. God promised to be with him. Moses was afraid, but he obeyed God.
Moses returned to Egypt, and with his brother Aaron, Moses went before the Pharaoh. But the Pharaoh's heart was hard toward the Hebrew people, and he refused to let them leave Egypt. So God sent a series of terrible plagues on Egypt. But none of the plagues touched the Hebrew people. After each plague, the Pharaoh still refused to let the people go.
I will not let your people go. Then hear what God says.
Then God commanded every Hebrew family to slay a lamb and place blood from the lamb over the door of their dwelling. And God sent death to every firstborn in the land, except those who were in a dwelling with blood over the entrance. As with Adam and Eve in the garden, and Abraham and his son on the mountain, it was yet another picture of how a sacrificial substitute would someday deliver humankind from Satan, sin, and death.
Finally, the Pharaoh released the Hebrew nation, and the people went out of Egypt. But the Pharaoh had a change of heart. With his army, he pursued the Hebrew people to the edge of the sea. So God divided the sea for the Hebrew people to cross on dry land. And when the Egyptians pursued them, God caused the sea to return, drowning the whole army.